Hi everyone, my name is Mohammed Imran Malik and today I'm going to do a demo project R2 for CXC320 course. This project is an extension of project R1 which we did last week where we had a photo site photo sharing app which was running using Ruby on Rails locally on our machines using RubyMine. So in this project I'm going to do demo how to run the same photo site app remotely on an EC2 instance. So EC2 is like an Amazon remote a service where we can spin up instances and then we can run any service that we want. So I'm going to go to my Amazon account, and first thing I have to do is like launch a new EC2 instance. So this is my main Amazon console where I can launch an instance. So I will click launch instance. I'm going to select Ubuntu free tier and default. Now I'm going to configure my security group. So security group configuration is important since our Rails app is going to use port 3000. So I'm going to open that port so that I can access it from the outside. So I'm going to add a new rule and I'm going to basically say open the port from 0 to 3000, and I'm going to open the source address which we can access it from outside. So this lets me enable change the inbound rules of my new EC2 instance so I can access it from outside. After that review, we will launch our instance. So I'm going to create a new pair and I'm going to call it test project and download that, and now I'm going to launch that. Alright, so my instance is getting launched now. So we will wait until our instance is launched successfully. You can just refresh it here. So instance is right now spinning. In the mean, I can go ahead and make sure my key is there. So I'm in the downloads folder and I can see ls test project. So this is my private key and I have to use that to SSH to my remote. So I will first fix the permission of this key and wait till, okay, so my instance is now running. So this is the main public address for the instance. So in EC2, whenever you spin up an instance, you get a public address assigned to that, and that is the public DNS address. So this is the main address for my EC2 instance. And if you want to know how to access your instance, you can actually click connect, and this will give you the instructions. So yeah, I'm just going to copy this command console. Yes. Cool. So now I'm in my EC2 instance. So I have the remote access to my EC2 instance. First thing we need to do is like, since this is the Rails app, so there's going to be a lot of package dependencies. So we need to make sure that we install those first. So since this is Ubuntu, so I'm just apt-get update, and it's going to update all the repositories. And I'm going to, since I have all the commands here, yeah. So I'm going to copy this. These are the instructions that I had already, and I'm going to basically save this. Yes. So it's going to install all these packages which are required in order to run the Rails app successfully on your machine. This is installing all the packages that required, and should be done almost soon. Cool, so it's done. So now we have to confirm that our Ruby is there. Yep, the Ruby command is there, and then we will also bundler, and yeah, so these are the two dependencies which are there. So this, all the dependencies are already, the prerequisites are installed. Now I'm going to copy my code zip file to this remote. So I'm going to first exit out, and I have my zip file here. See, so I'm going to use the scp command instead of SSH. So scp lets me copy my source files to the remote machine. So scp-i is the same syntax, and it's going to be this. So I'm going to copy this photosite.zip. So this is my source, and the target is going to be the home of that machine. Cool, so it's just copied all of my source code there. Now I'm going to SSH back to machine, and see, it's there. So I'm going to unzip that. So it unzips. So now I go to my project directory, and I can see the gem. So I need to install all the Rails app dependencies. So all the Rails app dependencies reside inside the gem file. So for that, I will run the bundler command, which installs all the Ruby dependencies from a gem file, and I say bundle install. So this is going to install all the Ruby dependencies for this project. Once that's done, we can then finally start our Rails app, as I have my steps already mentioned here. So we'll wait till all the packages for this Ruby project, Rails project are done. Cool, all done. All my dependencies are installed. So finally, I can now go ahead and start my project. And the terminal. So my app is started. So let's access our app using the public DNS address. So we will use this address since this is the public DNS address for my instance. So I'm going to go ahead and access app 4000. Cool, so I'm just running. So let's access index. There we have it. All our Photosite project is running on EC2 instance, and I can access that. I can go to user comments. Posted by John. So this is the same website which I had running using Ruby on mine. Now it's running remotely on this EC2 instance. John. So yeah, this was pretty much is it in terms of running the app. Uh, I will give one more use case where the public DNS address is not always helpful in remembering. let's say you want to convey someone else about, hey, this is my app where it's running. This is not really a human readable form. This is a very long address, so this is not appropriate when you have like websites running. So Santa, yeah. So all my users are there, all the comments you can see. So the photo app is running perfectly fine. So I was saying that the address of public DNS is not human readable. It's not like an appropriate address. So with EC2 you can leverage elastic IPs. So what it does is like it assigns, it creates an IP like an IPv4, and you can basically associate to your instance. So with this you can shorten this public DNS address to an actual IP address. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Allocate a new address, and it's going to allocate that. So now I'm going to click here, and I'm going to say associate this address, and this is my instance running. This is the private address. So this is like one-to-one mapping. So the uh, elastic IP address is the public address. You can access it over the internet. So it's going to map it to my instance. So I'm going to associate that. Cool. So the association was successful. Now we have to test it works fine. So I go to elastic IPs. Oh, there it is, and use this address to access my website. Cool. So I'm using my elastic IP now, which is this one, which I just created, and I have to associate it to my instance. Obama, by Obama. Cool. So everything is working. I just demonstrated how to use the EC2 um, elastic IPs with your EC2 instance, which is really helpful if you want to assign this one address IPv4. Now I'm going to go ahead and show what happens if you stop your instance. So in terms of stopping your instance, uh, what you do is like you right click here and your instance stays, and you can set that as stop. So if you stop your EC2 instance, this is like basically shutting down your EC2 instance. So its equivalent is like this. If I am here, so I do something like shutdown dot h. So this is the Linux command. So this is the same as doing a shutdown command. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and all my services are going to stop here again. Cool. So it's stopping that. That means the service that I was running is also going to go down. See, it's not no longer going to be accessible for me anymore. The elastic IP, since it's attached to my VM and my VM is down, so there's nothing going to return. So it just keeps it's gonna keep saying connecting. You see here, yeah, it's not going to connect since my VM is in shutdown state. So next time it comes back up, I have to restart the service. So my instance is stopped now. So this is instance stopping. You don't really lose your data. My data is going to be there, but what you are going to lose is like any running process. All those processes are going to get killed because this is instance stopping is like shutting down a remote server. Um, this is it, and then so instance stopping is like shutting down the instance, but you can restart the instance through reboot, but reboot only works for the running instance. So let's say I'm going to start the instance. And also, you have to be very careful about terminating. Terminating is like you're going to wipe out everything, all the addresses, all the data inside. The terminate is like a very dangerous operation. It should be done unless you're sure that you need to get rid of the instance. So go ahead and start the instance. It's running. So let's go ahead and People, I'm going to use the elastic IP. So see how things have changed. The public DNS address has changed for what it was before. It was 54 something, and after I stopped and restarted this is changed. So this is really important. So if you restart your instance, your public DNS address will change, because this is a dynamic address. This is coming from the EC2 setup, like how the infrastructure is set up, that if you restart your instance, its address changes. So this is so you are not sure which next address is. So it's very hard to keep track of. That's why you need elastic IPs, because this is a one fixed address that you have associated with your instance. So I'm going to SSH using, see, all my data is intact, and all my uh, old commands. So I'm going to use the same command and access it over elastic IP. Cool. So my instance got rebooted. I restarted my service for Rails app, and I can see that I have all my data there. I can start my service for all the processes which were stopped during the shutdown. So the lesson learned here is that never rely on this public DNS address, because this changes every time your instance shut down, and instances do get shut down, based on the processes running inside. So you don't want to rely on this address. What you want to have is like use an elastic IP address, and also make sure your any security rules you set are in the security group. So this is for my project R2 demo, which I've completed all the requirements, like how I set up using EC2 instance, how I copied my code and started the Rails app. Hopefully it was useful for you people, and that's it. Thank you so much.